You are looking at TV history. This gentleman is one of a handful of legendary storytellers whose talents and tenacity helped pave the way for all of today's mass media in all its forms. He and others turned a small black and white screen into a classic form of entertainment for generations of viewers. And I'm proud to call him a neighbor. It is a distinct honor to welcome as my guest, live from the golden age of television, Mr. Loring Mandel. I'm Bruce Apar, and you're watching Hudson Valley WXYZ with Bruce the Blog. Hello, you almost caught me off guard, but that will never happen again. Hudson Valley WXYZ is brought to you by Chase Media Group, and I thank the CEO of Chase Media Group, Carla Chase, and Chief Strategy Officer Frank J. Rich for bringing the program to you. As I said at the cold open, in whatever form you're watching it, whether it's on a mobile device or a tablet or TV, which we're going to be talking about a lot today, or a computer. And if you have an Apple Watch, I guess you could watch it on that too. And you can also see all of the programs on YouTube if you go and search for Hudson Valley WXYZ or Bruce the Blog or Townlink TV. And if you're new to the show, Hudson Valley WXYZ is a program where we like to bring you outstanding citizens who are making a unique contribution to our quality of life, and we also like to explore ideas and topics and issues that are important to every one of us. And as I said, it really is an honor, and I know it's going to be a lot of fun, because it's already been a lot of fun talking to Loring Mandel, who is a legendary dramatist on TV and theater, and one of the things, Loring, well, I said you were a neighbor. We both happen to be living at the moment in Heritage Hills and Somers, and you grew up on Long Island. Did you say you grew up on Long Island? Or?
No, I grew up in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago, right. And then you lived on Long Island
right.
for a long time in Huntington Bay, was it? Or
we lived in Dix Hills for 13 years, and then we built a house in Huntington Bay and lived there for 30 years.
Oh, wow. And how long have you been in this neck of the woods?
Since 2000.
At Heritage Hills,
yes,
that whole time?
At Heritage Hills.
What drew you there?
Well, part of it, of course, was the Long Island Expressway.
You mean getting away from it?
Exactly.
No, and you know something?
Exactly
the same, a big impetus was the same for me, was to get away from that.
But I have a son and his family in Framingham, Massachusetts, and another son and his family in Albany, and a house in West Stockbridge.
Right.
So we wanted to get closer to all of three of those things.
Right.
And that's why we moved.
And your sons, I understand, are they all video game designers, or some of them are?
Our younger son is a computer game designer, but he does the same thing that I did. I mean, he writes plots, develops characters.
Right.
He does all of that. Our older son is a computer engineer.
Right.
He worked for Sun Microsystems and Data General, and so computers are his thing. So he's the local tech support for us.
Right. And by the way, on a personal note, I think slightly belated happy birthday wishes are in order, right?
Thank you.
Earlier in May, you were...
Yes.
You turned, I don't know if I...
87.
Okay, I don't want to say it, but that's
87.
Well, God bless you, because one of the things I noticed as we were waiting in our version of the green room is that you're very adept with, mobile devices, and sometimes people will say, and maybe it's prejudicial, or that people of a certain age, don't do email or don't use the computer that well. But I mean, I saw you just picked it right up and started talking into the phone, and Google wasn't cooperating at the moment.
No.
But you knew what you were doing.
It's a consequence of a terrible handwriting.
Oh, really?
I was typing at the age of 6.
Whoa.
And I had the first electric typewriter that IBM put out for general sale. So I've been a technology kind of guy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. But that wasn't, at the time, that wasn't a Selectric, was it? Or?
No, it was prior to the Selectric.
Yeah. And which segues us into, what we really want to talk with you about. So were you writing stories at age 6? What were you writing on the typewriter?
At age of 6, I wrote a radio drama called United We Scream.
Really? At age of 6?
Yes. My father provided for the 3 kids in our family. I had an older sister and a younger brother. A closed circuit radio setup, so that we could be in one of the bedrooms in our apartment and broadcast through the radio in the living room.
Right.
And I wrote radio dramas, and I had a little photograph, and I had theme music and everything else.
Wow. And it doesn't take too much math for me to figure out that was before TV was introduced at the 1939 World's Fair, right, by NBC. Was it been NBC that introduced it, I believe, at the World's Fair?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I was at the World's Fair in 35, and I was 7 years old.
Right. But it was at the 39 World's Fair that television was introduced. I was just watching a documentary on TV about Madison Avenue, but they also referred to the invention and creation of television, and you were there. You were virtually there at the creation. And then they said because of World War II, the reason TV didn't really come into play right away was because all of the manufacturing resources had to be, diverted to the war effort. But you started, just several years out of, what was it, the University of Wisconsin? That you attended, right?
Yes.
I mean,
actually, I started while I was at Wisconsin.
Right. Writing TV scripts?
No, we didn't. I think we had TV first in our house in 1949.
Right. Okay.
Well, I was in college from 45 to 49.
Okay, and then
so while I was at college.
But you're saying you were writing.
I was writing
radio
stuff for Dave Garroway, who at the time
the original Today Show host, by the way.
But before he was a Today Show host, he was an all-night disc jockey on WMAQ in Chicago, on the NBC station in Chicago, and I was writing comedy material for him and sending it in from Wisconsin.
Right, and by the way. President Reagan, didn't he start off as, I think, a sportscaster on radio?
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan started off
that
way
was not
too,
Chicago.
Right.
That was in southern Illinois, I think.
So your prodigal inclinations, writing a radio script at age 6, seem to continue throughout your whole life, because within a few years of graduating from the University of Wisconsin, you were prolifically writing scripts for network television, when that whole medium and that whole format was brand new, right? I mean,
yes.
In one, I remember reading, I have it in my notes, in one to 2 year period, you had 5 different shows produced, right? Which is amazing.
Well, in those days, of course, I think that was Studio One.
Right.
And Studio One, you would go in and talk to the story editor. If the story editor liked the story, would pass it on to the producer. If the producer liked the story, you were hired to write it. It was be a 1-hour drama. You produced it in a couple of weeks, and then they did a second draft. The point is that from the time you talked to the script editor to the time it actually went on the air was about 6 weeks.
Wow.
It didn't have to pass all those different levels of continuity, acceptance, and program standards
and regulations, right?
And the advertisers,
standards and practices,
and demographics,
right. So
big
data, as we call it today.
So it was really simple then. Now, from an idea to the actual airing of a thing may take years.
Right.
Years.
Yes. And did you work with a team of writers or by yourself?
By myself.
Yeah, which also is different now. I mean, you know, you look at some of the credits on shows. I mean, the number of producers and even sometimes the writers, it just goes on and on. I mean, have you ever worked with other writers, or is it always by yourself?
I have done 2 collaborations. One was with a boyhood friend from Chicago who moved to New York, and we did a show together. That was 1956. It was called Army Game with Paul Newman. It was the premiere show of the Kaiser Illuminmauer.
Wow.
The other was a collaboration that didn't work. I was put by my agent into a collaboration with Danny Simon. Danny Simon was Neil Simon's brother.
Right, yes.
Older brother.
Right.
And I was used to working, and Danny was used to telling stories.
It's a very diplomatic way of putting it.
and he would tell one after the other, and they were wonderfully funny stories.
Oh, so you would...
And I would laugh, and he'd say, you didn't laugh enough. You didn't really like that joke, did you?
Really?
Yeah, it didn't really work out.
So now, so when you mentioned Paul Newman, for example, and I remember very well when I was looking at your curriculum vitae, and by the way, which has more than 30 credits, or at least 30 credits that include shows under which you wrote several episodes and things like that. And one of the remarkable things about you, you know, when I mentioned the prodigious nature of your work and you, is that you started in the 50s, right? You started 60 years ago, actually,
yeah,
right? 60 years ago. But I don't know if you hold this record. You won an Emmy for writing in 1967 for a show, a dramatic special that I remember very well, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, with Melvin Douglas, a wonderful actor, and Shirley Booth. So in 67, you won an Emmy for that. And then in 2001, right, you won another Emmy for Conspiracy on HBO. So that's what, 35, whatever it is, 34, 35 years apart. I don't know that anybody else ever won 2 Emmys over that period of time.
So
that's remarkable.
It's a nice pair of bookends.
Yeah, right.
Is what it is.
No, but I'm saying the fact that your, you know, your craft was so superior, extraordinary, that you would win Emmys that far apart is really something. I mean, it really leaves me in awe of you for, you know, for that and for other reasons as well. But I think people would like to know, Loring, like when you mentioned Paul Newman, you know, who of course is from the really glamorous era of Hollywood stars, and there are some like that now. I guess George Clooney probably fits into that a little bit, maybe Brad Pitt. But how involved did you, as a writer, get with actors? How involved did you ever have any input into casting?
I did later on in my career. I did, because I was working with people who I knew and who knew me and respected me enough to include me in that. But at the beginning, I had no say in casting. And in my first Studio One, which was really the first show I was actively at rehearsals for, a fine actor named Dan Gordon came up to me and said, "The speech you have here, don't you think it really should be this way instead of that way?" And I thought about it, and I thought he was right. So I went to the director, who was Franklin Schaffner.
Sure.
I don't know if
Patton. He directed Patton.
Patton,
yeah,
and
right.
Planet of the Apes.
Well, Planet of course. Yeah.
And Frank said, "Well, Don is probably right, but if you ever speak to an actor again, you're not going to be in this rehearsal."
Right, right.
And he was right.
But you're saying the actor is the one who said it to you, didn't he? Or?
Yes, but I engaged in a discussion with him.
You took the bait, so to speak.
And Frank was very right in saying, you know, you have to speak with one voice.
Right.
And the director is the one who talks to the actors. If I want to change something, I talk to the director, and if the director agrees, then he talks to the...
No, there's no question that you don't have to be in showbiz all that long to quickly find out the director is the captain of the ship, and you don't mess with the captain of the ship. I mean, that's...
Well, you know, in the early days of television, the shows like Kraft Theater and NBC's drama shows, the writer was actually prohibited by contract from being at the rehearsals.
Well, I was going to say, and isn't it true, I mean, with some... filmmaking, again, depending on the studio, the director, they don't want the writer on set even, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's always been a negotiating point.
Right. It's almost right. It's almost like you have to contractually be allowed on set,
Yeah.
Even as the writer.
Yeah. I was lucky, throughout the time that I was active, to be working with people who I had good relationships with. And for example, when I did Little Drummer Girl, they flew me everywhere, and I was at rehearsals, and I was at the filming.
Right, which is based on the Jean Le Carré novel, and that also leads me. We were talking about this before, and I'd like you to share it with the audience. The question somebody like me interviewing somebody like you is obliged to ask the obligatory question: where do your ideas come from? In that case, it was adapted from a best-selling novel by a best-selling author, Jean Le Carré. But in other cases, you were telling me before a certain sound that you would hear when you were first starting writing, and other writers were looking for ideas.
That's right. In the early days of television, everybody was scurrying for ideas, and I think I said that when the New York Times would come in the morning, you could hear scissors clipping articles all throughout the city of New York, all the writers looking for things that interested them that they might then go to a story editor and present as the basis for a script.
Right. However, you also worked on the soap opera Love of Life, right?
Yes, in 1972.
Right.
What happened was the head of programming for CBS sent someone to me and said, we have 4 soap operas that are CBS-owned soap operas, and we would like to raise the level of those soap operas to the equivalent of primetime drama. And would you be interested in taking over one of these soap operas to see if you could raise the level of it? And it was an interesting challenge, and I just finished a big project with Children's Television Workshop.
Oh.
So I said, sure.
Joan Gans Cooney, was she?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I looked at Love of Life, and then I came in to report on what I saw. I said, if truth serum was injected into the lake where that mythical community was, by the morning, not a single plot line would survive. and so they hired me to be the
head writer,
essentially head writer, showrunner.
Showrunner, right? Yeah.
And so I took it over, and what I found very quickly was that there's nothing you can do for soap operas.
Well, that basically confirms my opinion about them as well.
Well, the reason is
they just seem to.
There's no time. There's no time. The actors get the script afternoon. They do the technical rehearsal in the morning, the next morning, and actually put it on the air at noon, by noon that day, and then they're looking on the next script. And I started writing scripts, and the director of Love of Life came to the producer and said, we can't have Loring write the scripts. He can be the head writer, but he would just edit the scripts. And the reason is, he said, we can't do subtext.
Right, it has to be superficial.
Right, we have to do subtext. So I got...
You mean your characters were too well developed or too complicated?
No, you only dealt with the surface of the story.
Like one plot line,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No subplots.
I
right.
remember I would meet with the people who had been doing the writing and wanted to give them a chance to continue, doing my plot lines. And I remember Nancy Ford, who was a fine theater musician. She and Gretchen Choir
sure.
have done
yeah.
a number of musicals. Well,
Right.
Nancy was one of our regular scriptwriters for Love of Life. And when I met her for the first time,
Didn't they do I'm Getting My Act Together
yes,
and
putting
taking it on the road?
right.
Yes.
And Nancy looked at the story outlines that I had given her, and she said, I have a real problem with these. I don't know that I can do more than 2 scripts a week. I had been doing 3 or 4. And I said, well, what's the problem? And she said, well, the scenes that you're asking me to write are the scenes that always took place during the commercials.
What?
Well, they would
What do you
bring
mean,
the
like-
story up to a point of confrontation and then they'd cut away. So they never had to deal with the tough moments.
Well, I was going to say, right, the behind the scenes.
Right.
And by the way, I wanted to ask you, that was one of my questions. So when you wrote, whether it was a 1-hour drama piece for, again, the Golden Age shows, Playhouse 90 and U.S. Steel Hour, did you write to the commercial break like that, where you knew when the commercial would come and you either left the audience hanging or whatever?
No,
You
I
didn't?
never did. The closest I've come to that is when I started writing for Playhouse 90. This Playhouse 90 had certain number of breaks. And so essentially you had to write a 6-act play.
6-act, because in movies it's 3 acts, right?
Yeah,
Right.
well, traditionally it's 3 acts, but I knew I had to have 5 breaks.
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying.
So I wrote a 6-act play.
Right. And I believe it's still pretty much the case for a 30-minute show. It's actually 24 minutes, right, and 6 minutes of commercials.
I don't know
think.
what it is
Yeah.
now. Playhouse, Studio One was an hour show, and it was 55 minutes of drama and
Oh,
5
but it's
minutes
not-
of commercial.
No, it's more than 5 minutes. I'd say
Now
it's at least
closer
twice.
to closer to 45 now.
45 minutes, you're saying, and 15 of commercial?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right.
Well, once they sort of defanged the FCC, that's what happened.
Right. Yeah, so it's deregulated to a
Right.
certain degree. And of course, I say of course, but people watching may not know this as a matter of fact, but one of the things that fascinates me and millions of other people who remember that era is, along with people like you, contemporaries included Rod Serling, right?
Reggie Rose.
Reginald Rose, Paddy Chayefsky.
Paddy Chayefsky.
Of course, people would recognize if they've seen the movie Network or Hospital. Marty, right? He wrote
Yeah, he
Marty,
wrote
which Paddy Chayefsky seemed to have a penchant for one-word titles. And then also directors who started off in TV, like Sidney Lumet, yeah,
Sidney Lumet.
who became a very big movie director. But I know you appeared, Loring, in a documentary, right, about Rod Serling.
Yes.
So how well did you know him?
I only met him once.
Oh, okay.
I only met him once, and that was when
Of course, we should say Rod Serling of the Twilight Zone, who created the Twilight Zone.
well, the first Playhouse 90 that I wrote, 1959, was nominated for an Emmy. And it was put against the classification system they had, that it was put against 30 episodes of The Twilight Zone
Oh, wow.
for the drama.
For
Emmy.
the award?
Yes, yes. and I was told before the Emmy broadcast that I had not won it, that Rod Serling had won it, and subsequently at a party in Los Angeles, I met him, and he said, your show, he said, you were robbed.
He said, "Wow."
Yeah,
Wow.
he said you really should have won it. Is what he said to me. That was my only meeting with Rod Serling.
Oh, okay.
But I was on that interview show that
Yeah.
you're talking about because Susan Lacey, who was then at NET,
Oh, okay, but then I think she was at ABC at one point too. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, she did American Masters series.
Yes, right.
And she really was covering that whole time in television, and
Right.
that's why she asked me to be on it.
Oh, okay. No, that's really interesting. And we want to before the show's over, and it goes by very fast, especially because you're
I talk a
so
lot.
interesting to talk to.
I talk a lot. Yeah.
No, not at all. No, you couldn't possibly talk enough for me, and for people who want to hear about this. But let's make sure we talk about Conspiracy before the time is up.
Okay.
And so that was in 2001. It was an HBO series, and you won an Emmy for that. And then when I looked at all that was nominated for like 30 awards, including British Academy
Yes, it
Award,
won
right?
the BAFTA.
The British Academy Award.
Yeah.
Stanley Tucci won a Supporting Actor Award.
Yeah.
Was it Kenneth Branagh who
Yes.
won a leading actor? I mean,
Yeah.
and so just talk about what Conspiracy is about.
Conspiracy is actually a recreation of a conference that was held in January of 1942, in which 15 German officers and bureaucrats sat down to work out the logistics of what became known as the final solution. And this recreates that meeting, how it worked and how the people were manipulated, and the various different attitudes and problems that confronted the Germans at the time.
Right.
And that's what it was a recreation of it. And
now, is the dramatic recreation that you're describing, it takes place in real time?
it takes place in real time.
Over a 2-hour period, is it?
90 minutes.
90 minutes, okay.
90 minutes. The actual meeting was 90 minutes, and we did it in 90 minutes, and we did it as if it was actually happening.
Right.
The pictorial concept that Frank Pearson, the director, had was as if the Germans were actually documenting this conference, and that's how it was.
Oh.
That's how it was done, head on. And it was a remarkable experience, and also an incredible challenge to make it interesting enough to hold an audience without anything more violent than people eating sausages or sitting around a table.
Right. Yes. Right. Which makes it, as you know, as the review said, and by the way, on Rotten Tomatoes, the tomato meter, you know, that movie that you wrote that won an Emmy and a lot of other awards has an 87% approval rating, which is very, very high. Because I look at Rotten Tomato all the time when I want to watch a movie.
Yeah, I didn't know
87% audience rating, which is incredibly. Quickly, Loring, as we're wrapping up, do you watch a lot of TV today?
Not very much at all, really. I still write. I'm not really writing commercial things. Actually, a stage version of Conspiracy is optioned for a production in London next year.
Right.
And it's being done by amateur groups, and readings are being done.
Well, I mean, it like as you were saying before, it's a history lesson that everybody needs to not only know but keep being reminded about, right?
That's why I did the stage version, so
Right.
that it could be done that way.
Right. And as I was saying to you, I would like, because I'm involved with local theater, I would like to see our way through to having a version produced here in northern Westchester.
Well, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would really be helpful. Anyhow, I could be talking to you for hours. Unfortunately, public access does not allow for a program that lasts several hours. But I'm really glad that we met. I really appreciate your taking the time to do this. You know,
It was a
really
pleasure.
fun meeting.
It was a pleasure.
And we'll keep in touch.
Okay.
We don't live too far apart anyhow.
That's
so,
right.
So I want to thank my very special guest, Loring Mandel, from the golden age of television and from 2015 as well, spanning all those years. And thank you for watching Hudson Valley WXYZ with Bruce the Blog. And remember, when Bruce the Blog listens, people talk. Thank you.